Howdy, everybody. So today we're going to talk about investing, the Federal Reserve, and the economy in general. So, it's August. If you are an investor, you notice a pattern year over year over year. Every August, this seems to happen. A lot of the Wall Street investors go on vacation. The Senate goes on vacation. I think this year though they're going to stay in Washington, but usually everything slows down in August, and then it'll pick back up once uh, September rolls around. Kids go back to school. Even freight will pick back up as fall approaches. But I'm very enthusiastic about encouraging other people to invest their money, and then the damn market goes down 2%. That happens. It's perfectly normal. It could be headed for a correction, and the correction is usually a 10% drop in value, but it always bounces back. Don't be freaked out by that. Next week I'll be throwing $1,000 at it, and then if it goes down some more, I'll throw another $1,000 at it. One of the things about investing is that you're always going to have some cash on the side, and that cash, some people like to refer to it as keeping your gunpowder dry. So when these opportunities come up, they represent buying opportunities. It's like your favorite stocks are now on sale by 5% off or 10% off, and now you can buy that Nvidia you had your eye on, or Planter, or Microsoft, or whatever it was, Tesla, whatever caught your eye, and you thought the price was too high. Well, guess what? Now it's on sale. So now it's a buying opportunity. So when you're a savvy investor, you always take advantage of these dips in the market. Buy the dip. It's a great theme for the retail investor, and you could do quite well with that type of strategy. Another strategy is dollar cost averaging, which means that you're going to contribute a certain amount every single week, regardless if the price is up or price is down, because over the course of the year it would average out. And that's called dollar cost averaging. I'll see if I can find a link for dollar cost averaging and put it in the description when we're done. But don't be freaked out when the stock market comes down. That's perfectly normal. It's not going to go up forever. It has to correct itself from time to time. What happens is that as the stock market goes up, more people get excited and they start buying more stocks, and it kind of goes a little too high for what it's actually worth, and then it'll start selling off a little bit, and that's called a correction. It's perfectly normal. Happens regularly, routinely. So if you're going to be an investor, you're investing for the first time, recognize and realize that this is a perfectly normal thing. This happens routinely. You're like, I hate throwing my money in the stock market because as soon as I do it, it goes down. It's true. That does happen quite often, but it always comes back up. Always. You know, um, some years it may take a while, but it always comes back up. You should not be afraid of the stock market. Investing is going to be your path towards generating wealth, and you got to get comfortable with these little dips. And if you have the strategy of keeping some gunpowder dry, now these little dips become buying opportunities. It's like you look forward to these little dips. Instead of saying, "Oh no, my portfolio went down 5%," you're like, "Oh, cool, time to buy." So you're not afraid of it. You're looking forward to it. That's just part of being an investor. The Federal Reserve didn't lower interest rates, and it's causing problems for the economy. They were seeing it in the jobs report, and it really affects the housing market. And because so much of the economy is based on consumer discretionary spending, if the housing market suffers, consumers suffer, then the economy suffers and freight suffers. We would see that in the freight. You're like, when's the spot market rates going to go back up? Well, you know, probably not anytime soon. Not until the Federal Reserve starts lowering these interest rates. Now we are starting to see some movement on the board of governors for the Fed. couple of them just resigned over the last week because they believe that the rate should be lower. But right now, the chairman, Jerome Powell, has a seemingly personal grudge against the president, and he's refusing to lower interest rates. The good news is that his term in office ends in about 7 months. But until then, he's going to be a pain in the ass, and there's no data. There's no data to support his decision. Like a lot of times, people who make a strong argument will rely on the data. They're like, look, the data shows that my argument is correct. They're like, I have the data. I got the statistics are all in my favor. He doesn't have that. He has nothing. But yet he refuses to lower interest rates. In fact, the data shows that he should be lowering interest rates, and he refuses to lower interest rates. So the economy could be experiencing a slowdown. Strange as it may sound, we've cut regulations, we've cut taxes, we've improved trade deals. We have tariffs, we rebalance trade. All these good things, and yet the economy may still slow down because of the power of the Federal Reserve. If he keeps interest rates up, that means interest rates on credit cards are high, interest rates on truck loans remains high, interest rate on houses remains high, and consumers don't have as much money to spend on discretionary things. It's like the whole country is on pause. We're in a holding pattern, and it's not really gonna break loose until the Federal Reserve starts cutting rates. Now, many business people on the news channel believe that they'll start cutting rates in September. But even then, the guy would probably be a tightwad and only do minor cuts, like a quarter every time. Instead of he needs to cut it by a full percentage point, but he probably won't. He'll do a quarter at a time, just a little bit. That's all. It's like pulling the Band-Aid off very, very slowly. So you can think about the rest of the year, because we only have 4 months left of the year, maybe 5 months left of the year, and it could be slowing down. It's not out of the possibility that the economy could slip into recession, and if it did, I don't think anyone's to blame other than the Federal Reserve. Now, even during a recession, that represents some good opportunities for owner-operators, because used truck prices will come down. Even right now, I think they're still a little bit elevated. I think if the economy slows down, or if for some reason it gets to the point where we slip into a recession, truck prices will come down. And that would really force the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates once we're in a recession. They could be deliberately driving the economy into a recession and then lower interest rates. It's like, you got this so ass backwards. You should be lowering interest rates so that we don't go into recession. But the stupidity is just, is just enormous right now. It's like, no, we're not gonna lower interest rates until we're in a recession. Then we'll lower interest rates. It's like totally preventable, absolutely preventable. So we'll see what happens. The Federal Reserve Chairman could be fired, theoretically, but he has a 10-year term guaranteed by law. And his term's not up until next spring. And he hates Trump. So I don't see them lowering rates significantly throughout the rest of the year, and unfortunately that probably means the economy will slow down. There's typically a pickup towards Christmas. That a lot of retailers depend on the Christmas shopping season, and in trucking, we will see a pickup in freight as the stores would want to get all their inventory, all their shelves full in time for Christmas. But there may not be anything else to stimulate the economy without lower interest rates. It's amazing how much interest rates affect everything. Even at Crete, when you go to buy a used truck from Crete, the interest rates are over 10%. I've never paid more than 7%. And it's like I'm ready to buy a third truck, but I still think the truck prices are a little elevated and the interest rates are still high. It's like, well, I'm not in a hurry. It wouldn't hurt for me to wait another month or two, see what happens with these interest rates, and maybe truck prices will come down. The truck prices already dropped 5,000. They were asking 84,000 earlier this spring. Then they dropped it to 79. Probably in a couple more months they'll drop it down to 74, especially if things continue to slow down. You keep an eye on the jobs market data, and they had a change of personnel there because the data is all over the place. But it looks like, from some people's perspective, that the jobs data, the hiring is slowing down. But the good news is that more Americans are being hired and less foreigners, illegal immigrants, are being hired. But the numbers aren't that great. And they're not that great because a lot of employers are waiting to see what happens. You're not going to hire people if you think the economy is slowing down and you might go into recession. You're not going to hire. You're going to be in a holding pattern. You're just going to sit and wait and see what happens. So a lot of businesses have plans to grow and expand and hire people, but until the Fed lowers interest rates, they're not willing to pull the trigger. And there's still a couple lingering tariff issues there with China and Canada and Mexico, and they're minor, but they're still there. And the Federal Reserve is kind of using that as an excuse for why they're not lowering interest rates. So 2025 is probably not going to be a breakout year for the economy. It's a lot of Wall Street analysts are thinking the second half would be better than the first half, and that may or may not happen. But the Federal Reserve doesn't lower interest rates, then it's not going to happen. If the Federal Reserve starts lowering interest rates, then now we're talking. Now we're cooking with propane. But right now, it doesn't look too good. But for every type of economy, there are opportunities. For the owner operator, there are buying opportunities. You don't necessarily want to buy your truck when the economy is at its peak, because truck prices will be at their peak. If you could manage it, you would buy your truck during a recession when truck prices are low. And if you had the money on the side, like we talked about, keeping your gunpowder dry, when the market comes down, these present buying opportunities. So if you have some money to work with, then you're always going to be in the driver's seat. You're always going to be like, have that purchasing power. You're like, I got money I could put to work. I'm just waiting for the right opportunity. I'm waiting, to buy stocks. I'm waiting to buy a truck. I'm waiting for lower interest rates. You got the gunpowder. You got it all stored up, perfectly dry, ready for you to use whenever you feel like it's the right time. And that's a good strategy to have. It's learning how to play the game. If you have money to work with, then these slowdowns present buying opportunities. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.